In 2020, China tried to destroy Australia's beef industry. 5 years later, Australia's exports just smashed all-time records. Meanwhile, American steaks hit record prices, and China, they had to quietly beg Australia to come back. This is the story of one of the most spectacular economic own goals in modern history. Here's what happened. China banned Australian beef worth $2.5 billion. It was economic warfare, designed to punish Australia and force them into submission. Instead, Australia's beef industry not only survived, it thrived beyond anyone's expectations. American consumers ended up paying record prices at the grocery store. And by late 2024, China had to lift every single ban because their own economy was suffering. This is a masterclass in how trade wars can spectacularly backfire. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why economic weapons don't work the way politicians think they do. Let's rewind to 2020. COVID-19 is spreading globally. Australia does something that absolutely infuriates Beijing. They call for an independent investigation into the virus's origins. China's response was swift and brutal. Within weeks, Beijing slapped tariffs and outright bans on Australian wine, barley, coal, timber, and beef. The message was crystal clear. Cross us, and we'll destroy your economy. On paper, this looked absolutely devastating. China was buying nearly 40% of Australia's total exports. Losing access to the world's biggest consumer market, that should have crippled Australia's economy. But here's what China strategists completely missed. Australian beef isn't just any beef. It's premium, grass-fed protein with some of the strictest safety standards on the planet. Wealthy Chinese consumers had grown addicted to its quality. And there simply aren't many countries that can match that quality at scale. So what did Australia do? They pivoted. Hard. South Korea stepped up big time. Japan massively increased orders. The Middle East opened their wallets. And the United States, well, American buyers started snapping up Australian beef like never before. The result? Within just 18 months, Australian beef exports didn't collapse. They actually increased by 7%. China's economic weapon had failed. Now, here's where it gets wild. If Australia was doing fine, who actually lost? Plot twist: American consumers. But not for the reasons you might think. The connection isn't direct. It's about global supply dynamics colliding at the worst possible time. Here's what happened. The perfect storm. The United States cattle herd hit its lowest level since 1951 in early 2025. That's 74 years. The smallest herd in living memory. Persistent droughts across Texas and the Midwest devastated ranches' feed costs skyrocketed due to inflation. And breeding herds were slaughtered because ranchers simply couldn't afford to keep them. At the same time, China's trade tensions with the U.S. escalated dramatically. In March 2025, China effectively shut American beef out of their market through bureaucratic restrictions and expired export registrations. So while Australian beef flooded into Asian markets, including markets Americans used to dominate, U.S. producers had nowhere to export their already shrinking supply. Domestic prices absolutely exploded. Your ribeye that cost $8 per pound in 2020? By late 2025, it's hitting $10 to $12 per pound, a 25 to 50% increase. China tried to punish Australia, but accidentally triggered a chain reaction that made American families pay more at every single barbecue. Meanwhile, back in China, the plan was falling apart spectacularly. Without Australian beef, China scrambled desperately to find replacements. Argentina, much farther away, way higher shipping costs. Brazil, already operating at maximum capacity. Uruguay, excellent quality beef, but absolutely tiny production volumes. The result? Beef prices in major Chinese cities spiked by 30 to 40% during the ban years. Chinese social media exploded with complaints. Middle-class families who'd grown accustomed to affordable, high-quality Australian steaks were suddenly paying luxury prices for inferior cuts from halfway around the world. The government that claimed to be teaching Australia a lesson was now facing domestic backlash over food inflation. Not a good look when you're trying to maintain social stability in a slowing economy. Fast forward to late 2024 and early 2025. One by one, quietly, without fanfare or official announcements, China lifted the bans. December 3rd, 2024. The final two Australian beef processing plants got their export licenses fully reinstated. Complete access restored. By mid-2025, the numbers tell an incredible story. Australian beef exports to China absolutely exploded. In the first 7 months of 2025 alone, Australia shipped over 850,000 metric tons of beef globally, up over 16% from the year before. By October, they'd hit 1.3 million metric tons with projections to reach a record-breaking 1.5 million metric tons by year's end. Why did China cave? Because economic reality hit hard. Their economy desperately needed Australian quality. Their consumers demanded it. And the bans were hurting China far more than they were hurting Australia. But here's the kicker. Australia learned its lesson. They're never going back to 40% dependency on one customer. Ever. Let's tally the final scorecard as of late 2025. Australia found new markets across Asia, Middle East, and North America, and kept them diversified away from China dependence. Permanently, beef exports smashed all-time records in 2025, strengthened trade relationships with allies worldwide. China came back to the table, but Australia now holds all the leverage. China. Food prices surged by 30 to 40%. Angering middle-class consumers had to lift all bans and essentially admit strategic defeat. Lost leverage over Australia permanently showed the entire world that trade bans can spectacularly backfire. Australia now dictates terms, not the other way around. America, caught in the crossfire of the worst domestic cattle shortage since 1951, lost market access in China, while Australia gained massive market share. Consumers paying record beef prices throughout 2025. China's strategic shift to Australian beef locked U.S. exporters out of Asia. The country that was supposed to be punished came out stronger, richer, and more resilient. The country doing the punishing had to quietly retreat. In America, we're just paying $12 to $15 for a burger that used to cost $8. This isn't just a story about beef. It's a fundamental lesson about how globalization has made economic warfare incredibly unpredictable and dangerous. When you weaponize trade in today's interconnected world, you're not pulling a trigger. You're pulling a thread in a massive, tangled web. And you never know what's going to unravel or who's going to get hurt. China learned this the hard way across multiple sectors. Australian wine banned it. Chinese consumers just smuggled it in through Hong Kong. Australian coal banned it, then had to quietly unban it in 2023 during devastating energy blackouts. And beef banned it. Domestic beef prices exploded, had to lift the ban and essentially beg Australia to export again. Every single time they tried to use trade as a weapon, it blew up in their face. So where are we now in late 2025? Australia, riding incredibly high. Exports are smashing records month after month. They've locked in long-term contracts with Japan, South Korea, the United States, and yes, even China again. But this time, they're not dependent. They hold all the cards. China, quietly buying massive volumes of Australian beef again, at levels not seen since 2019. But they've lost all leverage. Australia can walk away from the Chinese market anytime without their economy collapsing. America, still dealing with the smallest cattle herd since the 1950s. Beef prices remain near record highs heading into 2026. And with China heavily favoring Australian suppliers, U.S. ranchers are stuck selling domestically at inflated prices. Now, there was the Busan Agreement in late October 2025 where President Trump and President Xi agreed to ease some tariffs. China suspended retaliatory duties on U.S. beef, pork, and agricultural products. But Australia's advantage in China remains rock solid. The damage to U.S. market share is already done. The lesson? Diversification wins. Australia proved that you don't need to be held hostage by one customer, no matter how economically powerful they are. Remember how I said your steak got more expensive? Well, here's the really crazy part. Even though China reopened fully to Australian beef, American prices still aren't dropping. Why? Because our cattle shortage is a homegrown crisis. Decades of droughts, skyrocketing costs, and underinvestment in the beef industry. But the lesson is absolutely universal. Australia learned, never put all your eggs in one basket, no matter how big that basket looks. China learned, trade wars are way harder than authoritarian governments think. America learned, global markets are so deeply connected that a fight on the other side of the world can empty your wallet at your local grocery store. And your grocery bill? It's living proof that when economic superpowers fight, everyday people around the world pay the price. So here's my question for you. Should countries use trade as an economic weapon? Or does it just hurt everyone in the end, including the country wielding the weapon? Drop your take in the comments. I actually read every single one. And if you want to understand how global economics impacts your daily life in ways you never realized, I break down these hidden connections every single week. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. Because trust me, the trade war backfire stories get even more insane from here. Coming up next, how China's ban on Australian coal caused rolling blackouts that shut down factories and cost their economy tens of billions of dollars. Yeah, another spectacular own goal. See you there.